Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Splash 2020, the 16th Annual International VFX and Illustration Festival, the ultimate online version. First of all, let me introduce ourselves. My name is Katarina, and I'm here with my colleague Michal Jelínek, and we'll guide you through these 2 days fully packed with lectures from the best artists around and a lot of entertainment. We are on air, streaming online for free via Twitch. So sit back comfortably, grab a popcorn, and let's begin. What does this online mean for you? Well, you don't have to pay for accommodations or travel anywhere. All the speeches will be available to watch from the comfort of your home. We'll do our best to keep the scope of the content more or less the same as usual, packed into 2 days. And you'll be able to communicate with us via slido.com. You should see a link somewhere down below right now, so you can ask any questions or have any comments that we will translate to our guests and lecturers right afterwards. And discussion will always take place after the lecture, so feel free to contribute. We'll be glad to hear from you. And the whole event is available for free, also thanks to our sponsors, namely Compositive, Autodesk, Hangar 13, Skill Up, the Cat Studio, Wacom, and Pipe Club. Also, if you like what we are doing here, feel free to donate. We'll be glad if you donate any small amount. You can do so via the Twitch donate button, or you can find other ways of donation on our website, getsplashed.cz.
So let's introduce what we have today. We have a few very good lectures. First one is Michal Jelínek. He is visual artist, designer, author, concept artist, and he is VR lover. He's starting his presentation right now, I think. And the second one?
Right afterwards, there is a lecture by Eliška Wernerová at 2 p.m. 10 minutes. And it's called Creating Stylized Characters.
She's only one person who will be in our studio here.
Yes, she will be here with us today.
At 15:20 will be Roland Reyer. He is Autodesk and Maya specialist, and his topic is Bifrost 2.1.1.0, which is visual programming for artists.
And the last one for today at 16:30 is Alex Horst with his lecture called Latest and Future Workflows for Games Design and TV in Autodesk 3ds Max. So he's a 3ds Max specialist.
So that's for today. And I hope Michal Jelínek is online. Michal, do you hear us?
Yes, I do.
Hello. How are you today?
Guys. I'm good for Saturday.
Michal is in Horswil. It's his own studio, Horswil. And today his topic is Metasketching, the birth of an idea. I think it's wonderful, and we're waiting for you.
Okay, thank you. So, do you want me to start?
Yeah, feel free.
Yeah, feel free.
Okay. So first of all, thank you. A big, huge thank you for inviting me again. It's not my first Splash, but it's the first Splash that I'm not being personally in Prague, joining the wonderful team of the Splash organizers, especially Michal Benda, who is the director of the whole festival. So today, I'm quite happy to welcome you in my studio at Horstville. I don't want to share everything what I have here because we just finished the renovation of the studio, so there's a bit of the mess here. But you can see some antique stuff around me, some VR gear, a really old school Silicon graphics computer, a PC, unbelievable, and so on. And of course, my favorite fridge down there made by Marshall. That's all about introducing the place where I'm right now. Maybe a few words about myself. I don't know who is in the audience, so it would be probably useful if I would introduce myself a little bit. My name is Michal Jelínek. I'm a concept designer, and they sometimes call me an artist as well, which I do struggle with. However, all my production or my professional career was mostly focusing on a conceptual design. That means creating and coming up with the innovative things even before they turn into a product, into a solution. Among the other things, I've been working on the latest Terminator, who's been directed by Tim Miller. At the moment, with Tim Miller on another project you probably have heard already about, but I can't reveal any details about it. So let's keep it under the hood for a second. And what else? Oh, at the same time, I'm also working for Wacom, and I'm helping the product management team to come up with the new solutions and devices for the future artists. So this is one of my roles as well. So let's start with my presentation today. By the way, I still hear the people from the direction, Michal Benda and Michal Jelínek. I still can hear you, so please mute yourself if that is possible. Can you hear me? Okay, they don't listen. Okay, I'll just continue with my talk. So feel free to visit my ArtStation. You'll learn more about myself. But I want to start with this. As I mentioned earlier, I was on that Terminator movie. If you haven't seen the movie, this is the ship I've been designing. That's the stuff I've done. And the whole movie is, guys, I still hear you. There's a lot of noise. Yep, please mute the microphones. Hello? Okay, sounds better now. No, I still hear them. Okay, hopefully you guys don't hear it as well. So it's a bit disturbing for me. Anyway, so this is the ship I have designed. It only takes about 30 seconds in the movie to be on stage. However, the whole design process took almost half a year to come up to that stage. And it's kind of fun, I think, that before we get there, we actually explore it was actually quite a lot of different directions. And you may ask how it is possible that we have generated so many different ideas, how it is possible that we have explored so many different directions. And that took me to a point that I find myself that I don't have really an answer, because a lot of people always said that this is all about the fantasy, it is all about the talent, and so on and so on. But this is something I can't agree with. It is very vague, and it doesn't really describe what's going on there. So let me give you today a brief introduction into what is the creativity, what is the ideation process, and where the ideas are coming from. So for a start, let's just take these things off. These are the definitions of what the creativity is. Someone says the use of the imagination or original ideas that are created in order, yeah, whatever. This is crazy. Creative is a phenomenon. Creative is about producing new idea. Frankly speaking, I never liked the word creativity. It has been overused and abused just recently. But unfortunately, we don't have anything better. So what is creativity? I don't like any of those definitions. So let me propose one which somehow reflects the design process. So somewhere at the end, we have a design proposal. It could be an architecture, it could be a game design, it could be a new character, it could be something that we are basically trying to come up. Somewhere in the beginning is brief. So they say, okay, we need a spaceship. So from there to there is a long journey. At the very end is something like, we will paint, draw, do some 3D modeling. We also render, and so on and so on and so on. So this is all creative process. We call it also design process. But what is happening before we can't really paint the idea, we can communicate it? It is something that is called ideation. And this is exactly where the ideas are born. And here's what is really important. Whenever we are asked to come up with something new, something innovative, we always think instantly about the artifact that we are about to produce, that beautiful illustration, that beautiful sketch that we will hand over to an art director or our client. But before we can create that artwork, we need to come up with an idea. So this is really important to understand that at certain phase of basically any creative process, the only outcome we are expected to deliver is the idea. And this is really crucial here. So what we are looking through the ideation process, it's not about creating the artwork. It's not about creating the artifact. It's about the producing the idea. And it's not as easy as it looks. What do we have here? We've been there. We've been there. So let's take a look at some of the popular description what the creative process is. I hope that you can all read my screen. I love all of these three examples, how people see the creative process, because all of them, they have something brilliant. Let me just pick a different color. So here it is. This is really important. So this is it, and this is it, and this is it. I don't want to read it aloud because we are recorded right now. But what does it say? Somewhere during the process, we create, then we start to feel like shit, and then we start to create again. And this is an interesting diagram. And I think it makes sense to kind of take a look at this diagram in a bit deeper way, in a bit kind of more detailed way. So what is going on there? We're about to produce an idea. So somewhere here, there should be, hold on. Oops. So this is a time that is given to us. And here's the cue for quantity of the ideas and also quality. So the brief is to create a spaceship. Okay, let me turn off my touch here. So what is happening? So once we get the briefing, which is the spaceship, we start to think about, how does the spaceship look? And at this very point, we know nothing about it. But then we remind ourselves, okay, the spaceship probably has a cockpit, to accommodate the pilot. The spaceship, so let's write it down. So it's going to be cockpit. We need engines. We need hull. So we start somewhere there, and our knowledge about the spaceship is growing. And just based on that simple analysis, simple research, internal research, we can come up with the first few set of the ideas, first set of the concepts. Then we can take it to another level, go to the internet, Google. Damn, I can't write today. Google the stuff out. And our ability to come up with the new ideas is exponentially growing until it peaks. So we are somewhere here right now. So we have delivered a lot of different ideas, but interestingly, although they are quite relevant, they are far from being new. Because what we have just used, we have used all of our knowledge and all the knowledge from the internet to come up with that set of the the set of the ideas. So we have a number of the ideas here. We have created a bunch of them, but we somehow stagnate, and now it falls. And we don't create anything. There's no quantity, no quality. How to get over it? How to get something, that is somewhere, very innovative? Something that is very original, something that is new. How to get there? Because we can't create anything that we don't know about. We can't create anything that doesn't exist in our brain. we can't create anything new that doesn't exist in the world because we are always using with those references. Interestingly, among us, there are people, they can do things like that. And these people are our kids. So let's play a kid. Let's become a kid for a moment. And let's start to think about what else could be in a spaceship. What else can spaceship do? So let's talk to our kids, and maybe we need to have, maybe there will be a doghouse in the spaceship, or a fridge, or maybe an ice cream machine. And then suddenly, in that stage, we start to generate the ideas again. So the quantity is raising again. I'm not talking about the quality right now because they're not as relevant anymore. But once we accept this childish game on finding a new functions for the spaceship we are designing, we can come up with something innovative. So when we connect those two together like that, then we can come up with something really innovative. So as you can see, what is happening here, we are dealing with the quantity and the quality of the ideas. And we need to get to the innovative one, to the one that is fresh, new, and genius, and everyone will be surprised. We can't get it there because here at this phase, we are only working with everything that we have in our memories, that we have our experiences, that we have seen on the internet, or we have accumulated through our research base. Once we get there, we start to experience that we are losing the ideas. And we need to become kids again to come up with something new. And only here, when we combine the relevant knowledge, the internet exploration, the references we can gather with the childish thinking, when we can combine it with the brain we have, we can come up with something innovative. What is really an important outcome here? It's this. The only measure for the quality of generated idea is the time you are able to spend on it. So this is, a simply said, a very simplified ideation process. But the question remains, how the ideas are born. So now we see what is happening when we are generating these ideas. Let me just save this one and move, oops. Save. Then we go to another one. Oh, lovely. Where we are, there we go. So this is a popular image I've been showing the last year as well. This is the observation of a person sketching a spaceship, surprisingly. And it's not only about the sketching that requires taking a pen on stylus when we work digitally. It's not about making lines. There is something more happening. And I'm quite happy that it wasn't only me who noticed there are strange things happening. For example, we are not just sketching, we are also making gestures. Sometimes we try to explain the things we are trying to ideate, we are trying to explain by using gestures. We also talk about it. I used to have a colleague, and he was designing a front grille of a vehicle. And when he was describing a rhythm of those rips created on the front face of the car, he started to make sounds like a taga taga boom boom. And then suddenly we knew that this guy is also involving somehow a musical fantasy or musical creativity to come up with something visual. So gestures and verbalizations are quite important part of the ideation process. So speaking about that, I've mentioned that I was not the only one who noticed something like that. There's a Barbara Tversky, my favorite psychologist. She's a professor of the cognitive psychology, author of a beautiful book called Mind in Motion. Observed these things already in 80s of the last century. It was quite interesting because she was working mainly with a group of the architects, not with designers, not with the concept artists. But she noticed that they all talk about their proposals. They videotape them on the VHS tape, And I think some of those recordings are still available on the internet. So they also use a visual explanation. So what is the visual explanation? So when I say something is that big, I'm using my arms and gestures to portray something that is as big. And I can set up the proportions by showing another object that is smaller or bigger. So I'm using a visual explanation. She also uses an expression that is called spatial metaphor. And it's just another, well, I'm not drawing here. There we go. Seems like my sketchbook is fighting a bit with the Zoom protocol. Interesting. I hope everything is fine. Anyone can confirm that the screen projection is still there? No, I'm the only one in the air. Okay. Interesting. So let me just minimize and maximize. Maybe we'll get back. Ooh, interesting. That is weird. Okay. So unfortunately, there's a bit of the glitch, and I can't use my Cintiq anymore. I can't use my Sketchbook Pro. It's a shame. So I'm going to talk and show the images instead. Hopefully that will work as well. So she's talking about the spatial metaphors, which is another expression for our bodily movements that they are contributing to creative process. And Barbara Tversky wasn't the only one, of course. There was Vinod Goel, Ronald A. Finke, and also a contemporary, famous, and good old Bill Buxton, who happens to be a chief scientist at Microsoft. He wrote an amazing book called Sketching User Experiences. Even though you might be not looking for a user experience design career, you might be from a completely different discipline or an industry. This book is worth of reading because it talks a lot about the visual ideation and about the ideas, how ideas are born in the form of sketching. So I highly recommend those books. So let me see if I can come up with some more images here. Oh, there we go. So part of this research about how ideas are born were psychologists who were penning down the expression or the direction called embodied cognition. This segment or this direction of the psychology, of the cognitive psychology, is focusing on the role and the contribution of our physical body to our thinking process. And it lovely correlates with those findings by Barbara Tversky and those who has been focusing on the visual creativity, visual ideation for the last 50 years. They even support some of those hypotheses. They claim that we are learning about the word by interacting with the word, and the interaction happens through actions. So if we move, if you look at something and we make few steps to look at it from the different angle, this is the way how we are exploring the word, how we are learning about the word. And this was also a bodily action because we use our body to move in the space in order to get a different perspective. And it came so far that they started to claim that our thinking would be nothing without our bodies. That kind of kills the idea of a transhumanism that we might be able to plug in some wires into our body and completely change our perception. The funny thing is that our brain is completely wired to our body. And that means everything what we will wire into that body, it will always go through the interface, through the perception of our body. And that's quite interesting. So please remember that. Let me just move to another slide. Hopefully we'll get there. There we go. There we go. Interesting. Yeah, that's the one I was looking for. So, interestingly, we know how to think about the subject we are going to design. We did that research. We use our visual memory, we use our experiences to come up with the first set of the ideas. And then we started to sketch them down. Of course, that is all easy because we are using the references from our own experiences. Once we add the external references, like all of the images or resources we collect on the internet, we can get even more relevant set of the images. They might be highly realistic already. And then if you remember, let me just draw that diagram. Oh, I'm sketching again, awesome. So that diagram again, quality and quantity, each time. So here we get the knowledge. We are using our brain here. We are using Google here, and we come up with a set of the interesting images, interesting ideas. Well, then we need to add that childish, that playful component to it to come up with something innovative. And this is here, so here's the kid play. And then we combine it together to get something really innovative. But how do we get there? So until now, we've been quite successful at being able to generate the images based on our brain, but based on our memories and experiences. Then we generated some images based on the Google research. Then we could generate probably some of the funny images based on our kind of childlike play. How do we put them together? How do we actually explore these images? How do we come up with something new and innovative? The thing is that we need to combine them together. And it's not really clear how the combination can result into something useful or meaningful. So let's take a look about the human ability to explore the images, explore the content that is already somehow defined, and to find a new meaning into it. There is an interesting theory that behind our ability to explore the images and come up with the new meanings, with the new functions, new relevance. It's our poor vision. But before I'll come to that, I wanted to take a moment to guide you through those few images here. There are clouds, there are some ink blots by Rorschach. There's this famous face on Mars where there is no face, and some images, some examples of the amodal and modal completion from as described at the Gestalt psychology. We all see something here. We see here dogs or playing horses, whatever. Someone see even something more crazier. But the thing is, there are no dogs, there are no horses, there are clouds, obviously. But our brain can see some objects that they look like real. The ink blocks, this is also a fantastic example how our visual perception can trick us. None of them is really representing a bug or anything specific. It is really a random spill of the ink on the paper that is flipped in the center in order to create somehow symmetrical image. Then here's that face on Mars. It's kind of a random formation of rocks that looks like a human face. The funny thing is that our brain is looking for these kind of random formations to identify the human face. First of all, it happens before we recognize anything else. We start to look for the human faces. It seems like it's the evolutionary advantage that prevented us from being attacked by something non-human. Interesting. But how does it work? The root of our ability to see things where there are no things is our poor vision. When you look at how our eyes are working, we actually find out that the vision is really, really poor. Just to give you a few examples, we kind of feel for granted that everything we see is all sharp, but in reality, we only see sharp in a cone about 15 degrees. Everything else gets blurred. Interestingly, none of that we are aware of. We perceive everything around us as a sharp image, although we can't do that because our eyes are simply not capable of providing a sharp image and 180 degrees the vision field. Then also we have a blind spot. This is where the optic nerve connects to our eyes. And this is really the spot where we have no capacity to see anything, yet we are not aware of that black spot. Then we have a nose, which is always sitting in front of our eyes, and yet we are not aware of the nose. And I could continue. In the end, we find out that our eyes are such a poor vehicle, such a poor instrument that doesn't help us that much with seeing. You know, eagles and other animals are way more better in terms of seeing the world as it really is. Yet we don't experience that poor vision. And it's all thanks to our brain. It's being said that about 80% of our visual perception is our brain construct. The brain simply needs to add a lot of missing information, a lot of the stuff we don't see, we don't perceive, because our eyes are not giving us that information. And yet we are aware of it. If we go back to the model completion, where was it? Here, our eyes are telling us about the clouds there, but our brain is telling us there's a dog. I can see a dog. Either we can't see a dog, there's no dog. Our brain constructed that dog for us. And friends, this is the root of creativity. By the way, I'm not a neuroscientist. I wish I was, because that's a science that I found utterly fascinating, and that is for the last 5 years helping me to understand the work way better than I probably could do before, and also to helps me to verbalize some of the things that were kind of a more of a feeling rather than a fact. So I would love to recommend a fantastic scientist. His name is David Eagleman. He just penned down a brand new book. I need to write it down. It's called Life Where, and where he describes, he goes beyond the visual perception. He talks there how our brain and consciousness works in the context of our physicalities and so on. Highly recommend in this book. I don't know if you can get it here in Europe yet. It's just fresh on the market in the United States, but it's gonna be here soon. If you can't get it, definitely get the book Brain or The Incognito, which has which is listing some of the quotes I put here on the side. And one of those most important ones is, our brains are always crushing ambiguity into choices. Let me explain that. When we saw those clouds, there were no dogs, or there were no horses, or anything specific, anything concrete. There were just clouds. But they were kind of random, chaotic, they were ambiguous. And our brain is always trying to find out the meaning in something ambiguous. And that's important to understand, because our brain decided that we see a dog. For someone else, based on their visual experiences and memories, it would be a horse or a car or whatever. But it's a choice. And once we admit that it's not happening randomly, that it is a choice that is happening in our brain, it moves all that perception of what is talent, what is fantasy, to something more tangible. It gives us a possibility to move this kind of magic somehow into a field that is much easier to access, because there's no fantasy, there's no talent. Forget it. There is just skill. The skill that you can nurture in order to build the ability to make the choices. So all of that creativity, all that ideation I've been talking about in the very beginning of this little show, it's all about our ability to make choices. Of course, when we don't know anything, when we had no childhood, when we had no memories, it is difficult to make the choices, because there's There are no alternatives to choose between. Just to give you an example, I'm a dog lover and I'm known dog lover. So for me, when you say a dog, my brain constantly fills in that category with Labradors, Wolfshound, Dachshunds, Duckos, and everything, like gazillion of types of different dogs. But for a kid who grew up in somewhere in the middle Africa, when they only saw one type of a dog, those kind of typical street dogs, they look all the same. For them, the dog would be just one specific dog. So if you ask me as an artist, as a creator, design or draw a dog for me, I can choose what kind of dog that would be. And if the brief would be, that dog should have a certain personality, I have also wider variety of my choices. But that wouldn't happen if I wouldn't have a childhood or my kind of history, my life as I had. That means we can influence that part of our ability to make choices. Maybe you say it is too late for us. We are not kids anymore, so we cannot collect those experiences. We cannot go back in time and force our parents to travel, to see the castles, to see the valleys and whatever. But what we can do, we have the internet. We can see the things, although we are not physically there, and we can build those experiences. And there's one additional component that helps us to build those visual libraries that increases our ability to make the right choices. And it's reading. I was doing that presentation, that little lecture about a few weeks ago for the Portland Design Week. And one of the participants asked me, what shall I do when I'm rather a visual learner, and I do struggle with reading? Well, yeah, it's hard to answer. But the thing is that even for you, if you struggle with reading, the reading still has a meaningful impact, because by reading, you're visualizing the abstract content you're reading. You're translating the words into something visual, and you align these things together in your brain. And this is the best way how to create your visual libraries. And again, that's the way how to how to improve and increase your ability to come up with new things, to create new things. So I'm slowly reaching the peak of my mission today. It's been chaotic. It's always chaotic, and I don't feel comfortable doing these talks in front of the camera, talking to camera, talking to empty space. I always enjoyed the eye contact. So I'm the beer tonight that would normally happen. It's a value for you guys. Now it's set. My internet connection is even unstable. Lovely. Can you still hear me? No. Okay. Hello. 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 Can you hear me? I can't hear you. Okay, interesting. So I'm hoping that I'm still alive on the internet and the broadcast is still going. You left me alone.
No.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you. We are still here.
Yeah, because I didn't have a feedback, so I didn't know if I'm still live or not. Oh,
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
so I'm
you're
slowly wrapping it up. I got like 2 more minutes. I want to kind of summarize the whole conversation. So the first thing to remember when you, as a designer, as a creator, are tasked to come up with something new, something innovative, don't expect it will happen instantly. Remember that chart. There's time here, and there's quality and quantity. So it's gonna go like that. Don't forget to include this part, this phase of a creative process, which starts with this is shit. Because you end with all your knowledge and all the internet knowledge, and you can't move it beyond that. So with this is shit, it's time to become a kid again and start to play. So play. Be a kid. Be a kid. That's the first thing. The second thing, creativity, the ability to come up with new ideas, is not anything magical. It is a skill you can nurture. By the way, this is a little side step. I'm gonna write it here. So there's a nurture and a nature. To give you an example, what does it mean? If you are 160, that tall, you won't probably be a superstar of the NBA. The basketball is probably not your game. Although there are some exceptions. Even if you are small, not as tall, you may play a good game as a basketball player. That's the nature. That's your physical gift. That's how you have been born. So it definitely influences your set of skills, set of predispositions. The same apply on your ability to learn, to see the things and so on, but it's not limiting it. What is more important here is really the nurture. So in terms of the creativity, this combination is 80% nurture, 20% nature. So you got 80% to come up with something new. You got 80% possibility to nurture, to develop your skill. The third thing, and the skill is about the ability to make choices. The third thing, how do we move these different ideas, the diverse set of the ideas, the super quality relevant stuff with the childish stuff in the phase two? How do we combine them together in order to get something meaningful, something useful? It's easy. Interact. And by interaction, I mean anything you can imagine. If you have 10 images of the super realistic stuff coming from your research and your experiences with 15 childish ideas, just draw them down separately. Then take scissors if you work analog, or digital, then just use the lasso or pick them, combine them together in the most stupid way. And you will find out that that interaction, that process of combining things together is basically leading you to choices. You find out that during the interaction, some of the choices are not as good as the others. But without the interaction, you wouldn't be able to come up with something new. So with that said, I want to close with 3 things. Give it a time, dedicate the time, give it a time. That's the number 4. That's the number 1. It's the skill. It's not the God's gift. It's not something coming from the 5th dimension. It's the skill you can build. The 3rd, interact. Interaction is key of creativity. And with that said, thank you for your attention. I will stay online, I guess, for questions if there are any. Feel free to visit me on my ArtStation. Send me a message. Look me up on the Instagram. If you look for the Metasketcher hashtag, you'll find me as well. And feel free to ask me those questions, because those questions related to neuroscience, cognitive psychology, or anything that comes to your mind, because this is probably a little encouragement for everyone here. All of that interest into the sciences behind the creativity and the ideation about the science behind the art led me to a moment to be a student again. So I'm in my 2nd year of being PhD student at Slovak Technical University, and the visual ideation is the field of my study. So ladies and gentlemen, if you have anything to ask, if you have anything to say, if you have any idea, send it to me. I'll be super happy to open a conversation about the visual ideation as a topic. Thank you, and talk to you soon.
Wow.
Hello.
Wow, Michael, thank you very much. A good deep look into our minds. And right now we have a few questions from our studio. Not if some followers want to ask Michael to something, send it. Please, guy in the studio, show up the address when they can ask. Yes, And Katja, do you have some question to Mike?
Well, I actually would have one, and it is about this is shit phase that you mentioned. I've been wondering, what do you recommend within this phase, like, or what would you do? What do you do when you get stuck in the process of creating something?
Yeah, it's a good point. Embrace it. Really embrace it. That's the happiest moment because you're going from the moment I know everything. I'm really cool. To discover it that no, I don't know enough. This is all shit, and that's really an important moment because that's the moment where you can make a step forward. But it may hurt because we are all kind of educated and nurtured to always deliver a perfect result, to always come up with that fantastic artwork. So the good approach is to embrace this phase and to embrace it in order to kind of allow the beautiful to happen, to allow the discovery to happen. Because if you won't let yourself to come up in this moment, you will never make that step. Practically, it might be a little different, but I was fortunate to work with Tim Miller a few years ago on the Terminator movie, and there were a lot of things we knew from very beginning that maybe this direction is not really worth of exploring. I don't want to go too specific, but I feel like, why should I do that? Like spending the whole week exploring some kind of a undersea life influencing mechanical design, future robots, and no, it's not gonna be. But just the experience that it's wrong pushed us to a right direction with the next step.
So do you think? Yeah, I would say so. But do you feel like taking some time off the project might help also? Like, give yourself 1 or 2 days, just think about something else. I mean, that works for me, but what do you think about that? Like, just get away from it.
Yeah, it's definitely it's always helpful to take a few steps away from it to get a different perspective, to refresh the eyes. However, a time off is very difficult to build to our clients.
Yeah.
So you can say always, here are a couple of the ideas that didn't work, but you can still claim the time you spend on it. But if you say, I'm gonna walk my dog, I need time off, how would you invoice that?
That's true. They're not that patient, probably.
No, it's a joke, but yeah, you're right. Making few steps back always helps.
Yeah, thank you very much for your answer.
Michael, I know you are a really big fan of VR. Do you think the VR can push the imagination for the creativity? What do you think?
Yes, yes, totally. Do you remember when I was talking about the bodily interactions?
Yeah.
Good. That was a test. I did talk about it, so I'm glad you followed. The thing is that when we sketch and draw, our bodily expressions, our bodily actions are somehow limited to wrist, forearm, arm gestures. But when we work in a virtual reality, we can use both our hands. We can move. We can make steps. We can crouch. We can jump when we need to reach something out. So we are using much more of our bodies. And if we admit that our body is an important component of our thinking process, then we are increasing our creativity just by the simple fact that we are using more of our bodies. By the way, there's a lovely study that was trying to differentiate between different types of creativity in terms of the brain activity. And it turned out that it's not that easy to separate the ability, the creativity links to creating verses, to musical one or to dancing one. They somehow meet all together. So there's just one creativity. And it turns out the more of our body we can use, the better chance we come up with something new happens. So yeah, VR is definitely a good way to go.
Thanks. Katja, do you have any question?
So do you think it's the future? Is VR the future for all of us, or at least for art? Is that the new platform that we'll be living in or on within the next decades?
You know, saying this is going to be a future, it's always quite risky. I don't think it's the future for everyone. Definitely, it's one of the tangible futures we are already living right now. We are already experiencing. However, I don't know, like 30, 40 years I've been, hold on. I've been introduced to those. These are Copic markers. Mm-hmm. About those 30 years ago, I felt like, you know, this is finally a medium that does everything I need, that does everything I want. And I felt like, you know, I'm done for the rest of my life. This is the future. Well, I still use them, but
they're still awesome.
Like they're still awesome. But there's also a VR. There's also a Cintiq. There's also a Sketchbook Pro and Photoshop, and there are other fantastic things. So saying that the VR is the future is really risky business. Yeah, it's part of the future, but it's not for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I got one question which is maybe a little bit personal. Michael, where the creativity is born, it was your little bit topic of your presentation, but what is your main reason to search for this? Do you have some background for this, your journey to find it?
Yeah. Great. Thanks for the question, by the way. And it wasn't scripted for everyone. No, it wasn't. I'm really glad it came. It happened a long time ago because I was sometimes making my money by being hired by companies like Autodesk to present their technology on the trade shows and the conferences and so on, and where I was always, you know, drawing and sketching. And I bloodily enjoy that because normally being a visual artist, a designer, requires being somehow an introvert, sitting in a dark corner, never facing the audience. So having an audience, it was kind of an interesting and new experience for me. But then came inevitable, because a lot of people after the shows, after the presentation or sketching demos, were approaching me with a similar words. Mike, if I would have your talent, Mike, if I would have your fantasy, you know, I have so many ideas, but I cannot draw. And it always felt like it's an insult, that I have an unfair advantage over everyone, that I can hold my stylus, I can hold my pen. That felt like it's unfair that they don't have it. But at that time, I didn't have the answer, because we all were living in the world that there's somehow some kind of magic or mysterious powers behind creativity. So about 10 years ago, I've started to look for the answers. What is behind the creativity? What is behind the ideation? What makes us human capable of coming up with the new things? So that was the start of the journey. It started as a personal insult that I'm using unfair advantages.
Okay, it's really full. Thank you for it. Right now we don't have any questions to you. We want to thank you for your presentation. It was really inspiring for us, for me personally, definitely, awesome. For you, Kate. And right now we want to introduce Eliška Wernerová, but before that we have right now some advertising. So guys in the studio, thank you, Michael.
Ciao, guys.
Thank you, Mike.
Ciao. Thank you
See
for
you
attention.
Soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Welcome back. On GetSplash 2020. Welcome back to GetSplash 2020. Today's I got a new guest, Eliška Wernerová. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, so welcome to my lecture or presentation. My name is Eliška Wernerová, and I work as an illustrator in a small, rather small game studio based in Prague. Besides of that, I worked on various projects. These were rather small projects, including illustrating custom tokens for Magic the Gathering for a small company, or illustrating a book.
Oh.
And I also did, as a side project, as my personal project, a small art book, which I published and sold by myself. But I think that it's an interesting piece in a portfolio too.
Okay, Eliška, show is your Eliška Wernerová with his presentation, her presentation.
Thank you. So we'll be talking about creating stylized characters and art stylization. We'll be talking about the rules that every artist should follow when creating stylized characters, but also the stylization principles that some and more of those and some not. So the first thing that I want to talk about is personal art style versus stylization. Personal art style, I would say it's like a handwriting. It comes naturally as you improve in drawing, and these artistic choices are based on what an artist finds visually appealing. So I think it's a rather unconscious process. However, it isn't like a cage, and various artists can have many distinctive styles. But they often include some visual features that make it obvious that it's drawn from the same artist. Here you can look at some of my works. You can see that some of the characters have different level of detail than others, rather different shapes. And in this case, I'd like also to say that stylization could be a conscious process, not only unconscious that you draw and over time your art style will magically appear. There are various styles with recurring elements found, for example, in game or animation industry. And they are based on what the target audience finds appealing. So if you understand those principles, you can create your own art style and use it, for example, as a brand on a social media. Depending on what your target audience finds appealing. So, what should we know before we start making stylized illustration? It's the fundamentals. Many beginner artists try to create their own art style, but they lack the understanding of design principles or color theory or 3D forms. So usually it doesn't end that well because the characters are just breaking apart. They aren't correctly executed in perspective and so on. However, I don't recommend only grinding fundamentals and then trying to dive into stylized illustration. Instead, I'd say that you could practice the fundamentals along with drawing what you like, doing any personal projects, doing comics or animation, designing your own characters, and just have fun. Because if you will just grind or study the rough fundamentals like anatomy, perspective, and so on, without drawing the stylized characters, how can you actually learn how to draw these characters? So I highly recommend doing both and making some kind of a balance. So first fundamental obviously is anatomy. Even a non-artist could tell that if a stylized figure is well drawn and the body is well represented in 3D space. This is because we have seen humans on daily basis, so we can immediately tell if something is off. So I recommend whenever you want to draw, whether it's a human, whether it's some kind of animal, always study how they look in real life and then try to a great tool, human body, which are the bony areas of body that show on the surface, and thanks to these points we can measure proportions and gesture, since they don't change that much regardless of a body type. So you can work with these even when you, for example, distort the anatomy, or if you change the proportions, deform the proportions. Yes. I've spoken about gesture. A proper knowledge how to draw a gesture is really crucial when drawing stylized characters. It's a tool to convey emotion through characters' body language. Poses can help to define the character's personality very easily. And it's one of the reasons for the target audience to get invested, because you can clearly see if the character is confused, if it's sad or happy or tired. And it's also an important tool for the sense of movement. This is especially in static media like comics or illustration. If you want an action scene, you have to bring the movement here. And the easiest way how to do this is by drawing the gesture. It will bring more dynamics into your illustration. I think that the main point is line of action when it comes to gesture. Its basis for a pose and movement. It shows you the direction, goes through the body and shows you the direction where the movement comes. And it's always C or S-shaped curve. So because brain recognizes these curves as a sense of motion. Also, very important when drawing gestures is starting by the overall silhouette. The overall silhouette should follow the line of action, and it should be readable even on a small thumbnail, because when you are drawing, the best is to start with these small thumbnails. The drawing should be fluid, created with loose, curvy lines. In gesture, you should avoid straight lines, even though bones tend to look rather stiff. When drawing gesture, you have to be loose as possible. Also, avoid too many details. In gesture, no details are needed. Work from big shapes to smaller, to more detailed. From less detail to more detail. It's always the key. Face structure. That's a very, very important part. You need a broad understanding how facial structure works in 3D space. And at all costs, avoid symbol drawing. I know that this drawing looks maybe kind of silly, but you have to know that from childhood we have imprinted a distorted two-dimensional naive representation of a human face. So if you draw something just from imagination without using any real reference, there is a chance that the face you will draw, even though it's stylized, it will look something like this. Instead, we have to think about the face as a three-dimensional form with three-dimensional features and draw them on two-dimensional paper or screen or canvas. This is very hard, but we need to use the knowledge of perspective to draw the construction. And as you can see, even the anime drawings here have solid construction. On the left side, the face you see on the left side, for example, is very, very flat and something looks slightly off. And the faces on the right side, or even on the simple head construction, the faces from the Western stylization, they just look better because they are it's a 2D representation, but of a 3D space, 3D form. This is very, very, very crucial. Another thing to keep in mind are the expressions. We have to also train how to draw the expressions, because it's what makes our character the character. It shows the personality, what the character is feeling, what makes it relatable to us. So I think that on the left, it's a great practice. If you just sit and look at the mirror and try to draw your expressions or even take photos, or if you're shy, just look for some references online. I think that on Pinterest there are enough references for photo references for drawing these faces. You should keep in mind that the primary features to show the emotion are eye and mouth area, and also the eyebrows. The eyebrows can tell a lot. And the secondary features are cheeks, nose, and forehead. Pay great attention to mastering drawing faces and especially eyes, because it's said that the eyes are the window of a people's heart. So the viewer will be really focused on the eyes, and even if they are just slightly off, it will be really visible. So just practice and practice, you know. So the next one, color and volume. Colors are a great tool to set the mood of the scene. And they could also convey information about the character's personality. I think that this is a great example from a movie Inside Out, because every character here representing the human emotions have their own distinctive color. For green, there is disgust, anger is red, joy is yellow, and really these meanings play a big role when designing a character. So try to look up how the target audience, which you will present your characters, takes the colors. Because, for example, game industry uses its own color language. I'd recommend you, there is a video online on YouTube which greatly explains the color language of game industry. Especially the color purple, which is in game industry, it's meant to be a color of corruption. Many villains in video games are in purple color. Second thing, when it comes to colors, is volume contrast. because you have these colorful characters, but if you turn them into grayscale, they still pop out. The forms of the characters are still readable and visible even on a small thumbnail. And this is mainly because brain reads this contrast better than a contrast between colors. The volume contrast is more significant for the brain. So always pay attention to this contrast when creating your characters. Also, there is this method called gamut masking, which is limiting the color palette to achieve color harmony, which is another issue, but I don't want to dig too much into color theory in general, because we don't have that much time here. Okay, so next are the stylization principles. These unlike the fundamentals, you have to implement the fundamentals, incorporate them into your drawings, whatever you draw. But when it comes to stylization principles, it's much easier because you can use one principle but don't use the other. It's up to you. Different characters have different amounts of simplification or deformation or using of shapes. So these are just tools that can be used, but they are not mandatory. First one is simplification and abstraction. This is one of the most significant principles, and it means filtering the complex detailed forms to simplified ones. This is mainly because you can read the notes from Scott McCloud. This screenshot is, or this photo is from the book Understanding Comics from Scott McCloud. It's really great, and I will mention it in the end of my lecture, so we won't forget it, because if you want to draw your own comics, for example, I highly recommend this book. Yeah, we can either remove some details or blend two or more details into one. If you see the head in the middle, there are some forms that are connected to each other compared to the photo, and some of the details just disappear. And the more you simplify, the more will the character represent an icon, which is one reason why we simplify this much is that it's more relatable. I already said that, I'm sorry. And due to simplicity of this character, of these characters, the information can be also received faster and with more clarity. This is why logos are so simple, because you need to bring the information to the viewer as soon as possible. We are living in a very fast age. Everything is fast, and we have less time to process this information, and that's why we also simplify these things. And also, one of the reasons for simplification is that in the comic and animation industry, it's crucial. There are time and budget, so you just, when you are not making a billion-dollar film, you just can't afford to make really high detailed characters. And also there is another level when it comes to simplification, and that is abstraction. Abstraction gives the form some additional meaning and makes the form more interesting. Again, I highly recommend you to go through the Scott Robertson book here, Scott McCloud book. I'm sorry. Because in this case, it has much more detailed descriptions, much more pictures here, so you can understand it better. Here are some examples of the abstraction. You can see that clearly these characters resemble characters from real life, whether it's animal on the right or human on the left, but the forms are really distorted and stylized and brought into some kind of abstraction. And this is mainly because on the right, I think it's mainly because of the dynamics and overall movement of the scene. And on the left, you can see the character and overall mood of the scene and of the character here. Next principle is deformation and exaggeration. Change of proportions, which is change of proportions compared to the realistic counterpart of the character. The character body parts here are greatly distorted. They are exaggerated, made bigger or smaller, have exaggerated sizes to emphasize their nature, emotions, and backstory. For example, the Powerpuff Girls are made really cute with those big eyes and very round shapes and very tiny bodies. And what is also interesting, that many people say that, for example, manga style in general suffers from this big eye syndrome. Many people don't receive it in a positive way. But I think that even Disney movies have these big eyes, and it's mainly because you can describe the emotions of the character even better when they have big eyes. Yes, and there is one rule that we should follow when we exaggerate forms and when we deform, and that is that if one element gets smaller or disappears, the other element must get a bit bigger to compensate for it. So we will maintain some kind of balance here. And the more the character is simplified, the more it could be deformed. So if it isn't simplified that much, it shouldn't be deformed that much. Otherwise, it will result in some kind of uncanny valley. This is a screenshot from the Sonic movie, new Sonic movie, and you can see that the character went through some redesign after a negative reception from the fans of Sonic. And it's mainly because you can see that on the left side the features are really too realistic compared to the character on the right, and personally I think that they didn't capture that well the personality of Sonic here. Yes, another one principle or tool to use is shape language. Shapes have prescribed meanings that evoke certain emotions and feelings in us, whether we are ever aware of it or not. So we recognize some shapes, and through some experience through life, which we as human beings have all gotten through, we react to those shapes. And this is kind of similar to colors when it comes to communication. You can communicate the personality through the shapes. So, for example, here we have some characters from the Pixar movie Up, and the old man in the middle is clearly made out of rectangles, and that's why the reason why they used rectangles is that because he is old, he is more static, he is very stubborn and a little grumpy. So they try to capture those emotions with these shapes and put it into a contrast with the character on the left, the little boy. And he is very round, has very soft shapes, and overall his appearance looks more gentle and more friendly and more happy and even maybe a little careless. Yeah, and also we have the character on the right, and we see many angular shapes in his face, but also when it comes to his design in general, the clothes and other stuff, very angular, pointy, which might foreshadow that maybe this character could be dangerous for our heroes or for the main characters. But I don't want to spoil this movie anymore to you, so just find out by watching it. It's a good movie. Yes, and also, as I said, what makes a character very distinctive is its overall silhouette, which usually follows some simple shape. If you want to create unique character, or if you look at unique characters, whether it's some kind of Pokemon, for example, if it's some kind of game character or TV show character like Bart Simpson, you can see that these characters have very, very, very distinctive silhouette. And it makes them unique whenever they appear in the game or in the series and so on. So I highly recommend designing from thumbnails from the silhouette. Design. Design is a very, very broad theme. It's very there are many principles in design. So I will just introduce one which I think is most important, and then just give you another resource that so you can use for exploring this tool to make characters. As you could already see, character design and character stylization are very closely related. So many of the stylization principles here also apply for character design. And the shapes here are divided into big, medium, and small. So every character you will make should follow this principle of combining these different sizes of shape, because combining these, which are based on a golden ratio, are considered the most appealing, because human brain is used to look at things that are composed in golden ratio, because in nature we find many objects that are composed in golden ratio. So this is why this principle is also used in character design and in character stylization in general. We can see Pikachu here, a character from Pokemon, which is also divided into big, medium, and small shapes. It makes him more distinctive because of the overall silhouette, and also much more appealing. By the way, these screenshots are from Cynic's videos for design. He made 4 or 5 videos on design, and I will talk about them at the end of the lecture, so you can watch them all. Okay, and we have the last part, which is stylization in the entertainment industry. Because when we design characters or make characters for the entertainment industry, we serve the vision of the media that we are designing for, whether it's animation, whether it's illustration, or whether it's games. The characters that are there in these games and animation are mainly created to entertain an audience. So we are creating visual features on the characters that are appealing for the audience. And also keep in mind when designing something or drawing any character for any sort of this media that every medium has its own limitations. I divided these media into three: animation, illustration, and games. In animation, we use much less complex forms than in any other media. Because in a traditional 2D animation, to be exact, because if we used many details, the production would slow down. The details would slow down the production. So it should be simple enough, yet distinctive, with readable features, because it will be put in motion. So we have to clearly recognize every form and every feature here is. So volume contrast will also play a big role here. In 3D animation, it's a little different because it allows much more complexity thanks to the advancement of technology. But the character stylization and mainly deformation and shapes and forms must be well executable from multiple angles. When you draw a character, you must do some turnarounds and see if the deformation works well in different angles. Because sometimes it does not, and it will break the whole model when you try to rig it. For illustration, it's very liberal because print has very few restrictions, and characters could be more complex. You have more flexibility in style. But of course, if you're, for example, drawing comics, it's more difficult because sometimes you have very limited amount of colors, whether it's a grayscale or just limited color palette that you can use for your print. And also there is one big limitation, and that is a lack of any movement that must be compensated with, as I said, with gesture drawing, with dynamic poses and so on. And we also need to convey the personality and emotion of the character through just one drawing. If we are drawing, for example, some illustrations for a book, it's necessary. It's necessary to convey the emotion of the scene just in one drawing, which could be tricky. And for games, it's crucial that the design must convey some functionality. So you will recognize who is the villain and who is, for example, the hero, who is the sidekick, who is the support character, and who is the NPC. You will recognize this clearly when playing. I think if you play any high quality game, you will just recognize these. And often, if you work, for example, for some platformer, the characters must perform some cyclic animations like running, jumping, or walking. So you are not creating, for example, just a splash art for League of Legends, but you can also create a character that will be put in motion. So you will have to. You will also have to do the same principles as in 3D animation. It must be well executable from different angles. And this is rather an outdated information, but still there are some restrictions on how much detail and complexity the character could have. Because I know that nowadays the games could be rendered really, really well with high detail, complex form, and so on. But we also have to put this in consideration when drawing the characters. And the lecture is just going toward its end. So, yeah. I'm sorry. There are some characters. The Sonic the Hedgehog. One is done for the animation. One is done for the 3D movie. You can definitely recognize this, and one is done for the game. So you can see some of these, the complexities of the form, the level of detail. Also, you can see the different shading of these characters and how they perform, so they could perform well in these different media. Now we are going into end. And I will recommend to you some resources that I mainly used for this presentation. These two books, Creating Stylized Characters and Creating Characters for the Entertainment Industry, from 3D Total. They are really great books. I have both of them physically, one borrowed, but that's from a friend, but that's not that important. And I highly recommend going through those because they explain in much more detail what we went through. They have many demos, how different artists make their process of designing a character, making a character. And also, as I've mentioned, the understanding of comics, another book from Scott McCloud, which is great if you want to create comics, or I think it's also good for animation, for example. Yeah. And for the videos, I highly recommend Cynics. Cynics Design in general, it's a great channel, but what gave me the most valuable information for me is the design theory from Cynics. So I highly recommend those, the design theory from Cynics. And the second channel that I recommend is Concept Art Bootcamp by Ken Lafferty. Ken Lafferty is an artist that worked for Riot, both for splash art and for concept art. He has a very, very funny personality, so I think that it will be also very entertaining to watch these videos. He is really, really great. So I recommend his videos too, if you want to improve in stylized drawing. And that's all. And if you have any questions, you can definitely you can ask.
So,
okay, so
thank you, Eliška, for it. It was really, really good, and I got a few questions. I know you are really big fan of manga.
Yeah.
I'm a 3D artist. Can you share some typical characteristics for manga? I know the big eyes, small
Yes.
mouth. Is anything else?
Yes, yes. For example, the big eyes are there, so that's why the mouths are so small, because
Okay.
you have to balance the character. When I talked about the distortion about the balance, you have to balance these.
Okay.
Yeah. Also. When it comes to manga, I think that you will need to dig into lines and line art in general. Having those smooth lines, it's what represents manga, and I didn't mention line quality in general, but it's also one of the tools that you can use for designing your characters or making these stylized characters. And also, manga is very, very tricky to draw, I think, because you have this hidden construction underneath everything, and only few lines that represent this construction, and they have to be really precise. If you aren't precise enough, it will just look flat, and people might tell you that you are doing a symbol drawing, which I already mentioned, which is not good, which is not that good.
Your presentation was a window to creation of the characters, but I know the practice make the master.
Yeah.
And what is your preferred software or tool for create these characters? How do you work?
Well, I know that many artists in the West use Adobe Photoshop, but for me, as I said, that for example, the lines are crucial for manga. I don't like Photoshop that much because it doesn't have a good stabilization algorithm when you draw the strokes, so they look very just not smooth.
Shaky.
Yeah, very shaky, very shaky. So I personally use Clip Studio Paint. It's formerly Manga Studio, and it's very good because yes, you have this stabilization, you have many brushes, there is a huge community that produces brushes, really great brushes for you.
That's important.
Yes, and also there are many more features, like you can, for example, have a 3D mannequin or import 3D models there. And it will give you a perspective grid at the same time. And you can use this grid as a ruler. So it will, if you just switch on the ruler, your lines will snap to the ruler and you will draw just straight lines in the perspective. So you don't have to worry that much about the whole perspective of the whole scene, because, you know, if you're drawing a character, you have to make the forms in the same 3D space as the whole scene, as the background environment and so on.
My next question was if you use the 3D for making the character and then transport it to 2D, or do you help with 3D? Well, because Michal Jelínek before is really a big fan of VR. How are you looking on the future of this technology in characteristic and entertainment, for example, like this?
I think that in this case, that's my personal opinion, and that's moderation, not overusing the 3D models for everything, because as I've spoken about the gesture, when you pose a 3D mannequin, it often doesn't have a strong gesture. So it's not dynamic enough. It looks really stiff, and many artists that have trained eye are very, especially in the industry, can tell that you use the 3D models. But you can use it just as a tool, as a little help, so you know how to distort things in perspective. Because I think it's a great tool if you are not that skilled in perspective, or perspective isn't your thing. Because some people just have problems in understanding how the perspective works. And I'm one of them, so I use 3D models for these.
So you help make some basic shapes and focus camera and all of this, and then you do transport and drawing to everything with that. I hear something a little bit what I'm interesting. What are you talking about the hentai? I think you are a little bit expert for it.
Okay, when we did the practice, it just slipped here that I'm making right now, the company that I'm working on, we are making a hentai game. So
it's really fun.
Yes, it's kind of fun, and people just think that you know, for example, whenever artists draw these hentai stuff, they get aroused or something, or they are just some kind of sexual perverts or something. But
I don't think so.
it's just practicing anatomy, because you know you were just looking at naked people every day and just draw them. For me, there is after 6 months of working here, I don't find anything sexual about naked people anymore.
I understand.
Yeah.
So thank you for your lecture. It was really interesting. And right now we have, I think, advertising next one. And also the next is Roland Reyer. And after advertising, we will be touch soon.
Sure.
Join us. At the start, I have some typical introduction and some questions to you. Where are you right now? You are in America?
I'm based in Germany.
That's close.
I'm working from the home office in Germany.
At the screen behind you, that's your home?
Yeah, isn't it nice? You know, my little office here.
The one. So you have a blue screen or green screen?
It's a green screen, yeah.
It's a green screen. Nice one. Nice one.
We have official backgrounds from Autodesk.
Okay. Your presentation will be about Bifrost in Maya. Exactly 2.1.10. And it's a visual programming for artists. Very interesting for us. I'm a 3D studio guy. Maya is a little bit difficult to me, so I will enjoy your presentation. What we want to ask to Roland? Do you have any question, Katja?
Not yet. We'll see how it goes. What have you got prepared for this? I can't wait. I have never worked personally in Maya, so this will be a big surprise for me also. Let's see what it can do.
So I need to prepare some little things here. So for my presentation, I need to pin some windows to the front so that they don't disappear all the time.
No problem.
And
we have a time.
some loading here.
Yeah, so far I might say that I really like the presentation from Eliška. Like that's been special because it's not so often that someone really gives you the tools to use to create something. So this was amazing for me.
She shares something.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
always good.
let's go. And also I think this was a starting point for a lot of us drawing manga characters. Actually for me it was the beginning.
Can I share my screen already?
Yes, of course you can try.
Because I need a special option here. I need to make it so, because after that I won't see you anymore and I don't see my own video. So if my video drops out, I'm really sorry about it. You can interrupt me and tell me that it dropped out because
Okay.
my camera will only last for 30 minutes and then will shut out and I have to turn it on again.
All right.
Okay, let's try it. Let's
It's not
try
a
it.
real webcam.
We will let you know if anything like that happens.
So you see my screen
Yes, Maya
Yes.
2020.
and you see, you know, here's a Maya or one instance of Maya.
Yes, we see it. We see it.
So I hope it's not too slow, you know, the whole animations that are in there, and you know my working with it, because in the end I will actually turn to this Maya here, and you know build something in their life. And I hope that's not too slow. That won't be too bad.
It
But
looks
we will see.
It looks good. It looks good. No lagging, so I think it's okay.
Okay.
And if you are ready, you can go.
Can we start already, or how is it? I thought you have a break.
We are still online, so you can start the presentation. It's on you.
Oh, wonderful. That's great. So then let's start. With my PowerPoint, of course. So, hello all together. My name is Roland Reyer. I'm a Maya technical specialist at Autodesk Media and Entertainment. I'm based in Germany. I'm sitting in my home office, in my beautiful home office here. And today I would like to talk about Maya 2020, of course, but a specific feature in Maya 2020, and that is the new Bifrost. We have a new generation of Bifrost, a new effects plugin for Maya. You may know the name Bifrost from the previous version, the version 1.0, which is still in Maya, which is used for water effects. All kind of liquids can be simulated with that. And this new version of Bifrost is not so much focused, it's also focused on very much on special effects, but it is mainly focused about being able to visually program something, to do something that you could not do in Maya before. So in Maya before, you could build constructions like in rigging, for example. You had things like expressions in Maya where you could really program something, make a new function. But Bifrost goes far beyond that. So that is a far more elegant way to program things. So I'll jump through this whole presentation right to where the Bifrost section begins, because I have 2 or 3 examples that I would like to show you, and that all takes a little bit time. And then we run out of time if I'm not really fast and do the presentation quick here. So in version 2.1 of Bifrost, our programmers have improved the way you work with it. So the graphical UI has been improved. Everything runs a little bit smoother and it is a little bit more comfortable. We introduced new so-called spatial queries that are queries in space that you can use to query if you know, a surface is close by or what direction this surface faces. Stuff like that, and we will do an example of that in a few seconds. As I said, the user interface has become more comfortable. So you see here in the upper image, this is the graph that you will build in Bifrost. And yes, it is visual programming, which means it's this very technical task of programming. And yes, it's very technical and complicated, but it's also a lot of fun when you start to see, oh, my stuff is working here. So you know, suddenly I built something that is completely new in Maya that you could not do before. And we will make a little example here. New in version 2.1 is this elegant F curve that you have in Bifrost. So it's a curve to bend ranges of values to say, okay, it starts slowly and then rises quickly and then fades out slowly. Stuff like that can be done there. And the whole working with different data types has become more comfortable within Bifrost. It was a little bit of a hack before. These spatial queries that I was talking about can be used. So here you see an example of that. So for example, we ask for these points of the grid up here, and we query what's close by. And it gives me all of these locations on a different surface that I can use to do things. For example, I can place instances there, or I can start to deform them. I can, find out, am I looking from the outside or looking from the inside? Stuff like that is a really interesting thing. So there a whole bunch of function is new here. And finally, there are new arrow examples or new dynamics examples. So arrow is one of the sections, one of these dynamic sections where Bifrost has become more comfortable. So when you do explosions, fire, smoke effects or so, then Bifrost 2.1 will be exactly for you. But as I said, it can be very technical. There are some examples that you can use right away, but you still have to dive into the graph and, to tweak some places, swap out some things and stuff like that. So that is why it's important for you to learn how that whole thing works. And with that said, I'm going to dive into Maya here. So I made myself a screen layout with a perspective camera, an outliner here in the middle, and the Bifrost graph editor here on the right side. And the channel box and the outliner and the attribute editor are collapsed. I don't need them all the time, so most of the time I leave them off because we don't need that to use that space. So I'm going to turn off my PowerPoint here so I don't get confused with all of the windows. Because what I want to show you first is something that is hard to explain, and I'm trying to explain it with another Maya that I'm using here as a little bit of a PowerPoint substitute. So what I want to do here is to use a very simple geometry and play around with the points. That's what we can do with Bifrost. That's what works really well here. So what I want to do here is to say, I want to get all of the points of this mesh here, all of the red dots that I show here are these points that are point positions. And then I want to add a random value, and that's shown here as green arrows. These green arrows are created automatically. And as you can see here in the animation, these green arrows point more or less all to the right and all upwards. The random numbers that we create here initially are all positive, so they point more to the right and more upwards. And we would have to do something with them to also, receive negative values. But for, just for the purpose here, it's good enough. And then we're going to add these green arrows to the red points, and we will receive a distorted mesh. Pretty simple, you say? Yeah, that's true. And, I would like to show you the first steps in Bifrost because for artists, it's pretty difficult to start with this graph here. So first of all, I'm going to create this, this mesh here that I started with, and I turn off the grid here. I turn on wireframe on shaded so that we keep seeing a wireframe on this thing here. And then here in the graph editor, I will create a new graph. You see, this is a new graph with an output node and an input node. These nodes can be created anytime here. So in case you delete them or you need more than one, you can at any time recreate them. I don't need that input node right now. I want to take my plane into here, and I'm using the middle mouse button, drag and drop, flip, and here's my plane suddenly living in Bifrost. So there was a channel opened through this graph, Bifrost graph node, which is exactly what is in this window here. So here's a connection, the mesh connection, that's a blue thing. That is an object connection, and when I click on it, I get a wire that sticks to my mouse pointer. And because I don't have anything else, I just stick it into the output. And then we see a new object appear here, that is this BIF object. That is an exact copy of my input plane. And you can see that it's exact because when I modify the input plane, you see that it's very much like an instance of my initial geometry. And inside this wire here, we have a lot of information flowing. So I can add a watch point here. A watch point is a kind of an information, what kind of data flows in this wire. And we see, for example, here's a point position. These are all of the points that are making this plane, this polygon object. Here are the point normals. Here's a description of the faces, the face normals, the UVs, etc. So all of this data is in here. We see that we have 121 elements. That's 11 times 11 rows of vertices. And we will use these point positions now to add some random values to them, and then put them back into the object. So how do I get them out of this wire? We need to create a new node here. And the only way to create new nodes is to hit the tab key. So just hit the tab key, you get this fantastic menu here with hundreds and thousands of nodes, which is a little bit tedious to browse through. So instead of that, what we're going to do here is to say, I just start to type something. So for example, a get point position. So here's a get point position thing, and this get point position copies the positions out of this object wire. So the whole object data flows through the wire, and what we get out is a list of point positions. Now that is something I need to explain, because this list of point positions, that is something in these nodes that is confusing at the beginning. We have different colors for these plugs, so different data types like integer, float, float3, that is an XYZ position, or RGB color, and whole objects have different colors. You can check what data type you have when you hover over one of these inputs or outputs. You see down here, this is a float3. Then you have this plus sign on some nodes. You can add new plugs on this node, so new data wires or new, real plugs actually. And then you have all of these different types. So this hat form means that this is an array of values, and we see the same hat function down here. So it has become an array. 121 values come out of this plug in one thing, and we can plug it into another node, and they will all be calculated just so. So immediately you have the result. All of these have different types here. You can learn that easily in the manual. And then we go on to arrays. So these lists of values are a big thing in Bifrost. And Bifrost is really good at working at them very fast, to calculate the whole thing immediately. So for example, if you plug two arrays into a node, for example, the add node, and then say, what's the result? You immediately get all of the values added together, and boom, here's your result. You don't have to write a loop or something that does that immediately and automatically. Other nodes, for example, can also, multiply your whole array with a single value. That's also not a problem. But you either have the same length or a single value. Anything else is a problem, because if one array is shorter, what do we do with it then? So it either is the same length or one value, and the rest is not working. Okay, so some nodes spit out a different type. So for example, if I had a find all in array node and feed in Boolean values and tell it to find all the ones, it doesn't spit out an array with all the ones. It spits out indices. Where are all my ones? We will talk about that later. So let's put this away and have a look here. So now we have this position here. And what we actually want to do, so I don't know how to build the in-betweens, but I can say at least I want to add something. So here's an add node, which complains that there aren't any values plugged into it. So I plug at least this one value into it. And then we want to get this whole thing, once I've added the random values, I want to get it back into the wire. And that is done with a node called set point position. That's this one here. Set point position requires an object. So I plug in this plug here. That's my object here. And you see my object disappears because I removed it from the output. Here's the object again. And it's still not there because there are no points. So we have to set these points, and they are, you know, exactly as before because I have not added anything here in the add node. So now I could say, I could create a fixed value, which is really boring. So for example, when I add a 5 in Y, then the whole thing will be translated upwards, the whole mesh, because I'm adding 5 units to all of these single points. There's a better node here. There's a random node, a random value array. And when I plug that in, my object will disappear again. Boom. Because this random value array does not have the same number of members, and it does not even have one member. It just has 0 members. Here's the size of the array. It's 0. So we don't have any members at all, no random numbers at all. When I type it 121, you see that it, you know, the object reappears and we have some sort of randomness, but not really. It looks a bit strange, you know, as if, you know, from some angles, the lines seem to be straight. And that is because, look, when I hover over that, look down here in this line, you see that this is only a float. It's a single floating point number instead of XYZ. So how do we define the type of this node? And the solution lies in this info tab here. That is a quick help for nodes. And for this node here, it tells me that the offset does a certain thing, but the offset is also defining the type of this thing. So I right mouse button on the offset, and here I can either open this window and set the type. That's the full-blown type communication. Or I right mouse button and just go and say, oh, here are some quick choices. Let me take the math float 3, so XYZ values. And now it looks better. It's much more random now. From every angle, we see the random numbers that we have added here. So that is a very simple example how you start with this thing. You see that you need to know some things about the plugs, for example. So these plugs here with these funny icons mean, for example, normally add will only add 2 numbers, 2 single numbers. But, you know, for convenience reasons, our programmer said, hey, if I find that this is an array coming in, I can automatically process the whole array and spit out also a complete array of things that you can use later for other purposes. So here in the set point position, that expects an array of points. So it says, okay, everything is normal. I can deal with all of these numbers that come out of here. So you see, many things work automatically. Some things are surprisingly difficult. That thing with the data type, for example, that is always something that stops you from playing around. But now that you know it, it should be a little bit easier. Now let's try something else. So I have another example here that I have an animation for. So we want to check objects for intersection. And I've cut open a cylinder here to show you intersection here. And this has actually that's the wrong one. To show you an intersection. So let me zoom out a little bit. So here we have, it's not working, unfortunately. So here we have a point here, and we want to check, is this point inside of the other object or outside of the other object? We as humans see, of course, it's outside of the other objects, but how can we tell? There is a method in Bifrost, and you know, this is another example that we can use to learn Bifrost, where you say, hey, let's find the closest point on the surface of the other object. So the, you know, the closest distance from here to, or the closest point that you can find. And this brown one here is a so-called location, a special kind of thing on a surface. It's not a position, it's not X, Y, Z. It's something that you, or it's a more abstract thing. And then let's find this vector that we have over here. So you can, or we can calculate this vector quite easily by subtracting this red one from the brown one position wise. So X, Y, Z, you subtract, and then you get an arrow pointing to the first value in the subtraction. What happens when I look from inside? You see that here, same thing. There is a closest point, and I can calculate the vector. My point here is that when you now look from outside, you can compare this gray vector that we have here with this green surface normal. And something that stands out here for us is that they point in opposite directions. And for inside, you see that they point in the same direction. Now we have a function that we can use to calculate the angle between the two. So let me move this away here and get my PowerPoint here back. So here again, we have a sphere, for example, and we take all the points on the sphere and say, let's calculate the shortest point on the torus, and then say, okay, we have this vector here, and we compare to the surface normal. And when we compare that, we can use a so-called dot product in Bifrost that gives us a value larger than 0 when this angle is smaller than 90 degrees. So when they mostly point in the same direction, then we have a value larger than 0. And when they point in opposite direction, like when I'm looking from outside, this dot product is smaller than 0. So greater than 0, smaller than 0. How is that? This dot product is basically the cosine of the angle, the cosine of this angle. And you see for the first 90 degrees, it's greater than 0. And then 90 degrees, it goes below 0. Anything else, you know, is this side again, because when the vectors, you know, do this here and come back on the other side, you have a smaller angle than 90 degrees again. Okay, so let's try this. It's actually not so difficult. It sounds more difficult than it actually is. So we have a torus here. I like to use a torus as an example object because it has a bit more complex geometry than other, you know, boxes, for example, because, you know, you can also test things like, oh, there's more geometry of that same object behind that wall. And that is an important case to test here. So what we want to do here is we create a Bifrost graph. We again, you know, delete this input node and pull the torus in and then pull the sphere in, right, like so. And then we say, okay, from the torus, I want to get the closest position. So let's start typing closest. And here is a closest locations and the closest point. Closest point means from the starting point here, find the closest vertex on the torus. But we want the closest location, really the closest location on the surface. You see this node expects a geometry, that's the torus in this example. It expects positions we can't plug in the sphere directly because that's an object here. So you know what we have to do. We have to get point position to extract the positions of these points of the sphere, and then we plug in the positions. So what we get then is locations. What the heck are locations? We can first have a look at locations, and maybe that's clearer than when we see them. There is a node, or we have a whole class of nodes called scope. Those are nodes when you want to scope out something, when you want to inspect something. An oscilloscope, for example, or a telescope is a scope, right? So here we have a location scope, yeah? And this location scope accepts locations. It also accepts the geometry where the locations are from, or on this geometry we have these locations, and also positions that we want to use to draw some arrows, and you will see what I mean in a second. So here you see what I mean. I go a little bit closer and maybe turn on anti-alias. So you see that from all of the points on the sphere, I get an arrow to the surface of this torus. And on the surface of the torus, you see these rings. These are kind of the locations that I was talking about. So the location scope says, hey, to place this little ring on the surface, I need to find the actual position and maybe also the normal of that surface point. But a location is not a position. A location is an abstract point on that polygon object. And even when I deform that object, I can still take the position, take the location and ask, where's that position now? And how is that normal now? And when you deform it again, you can still take that same location and say, give me the position now and give me the normal now after the deformation. Okay, so locations are like living, things on the surface. This is very nice. Let me turn the background maybe to black. This is very nice when I move it inside of this torus. Look like this very disco-like thing here that we have here, and it's always pointing at the closest point of the surface. So when we are inside, really, we are looking inside at this surface. So we could try to check this, check out this this normal of the torus. So how does that work? So from these locations here, we can query this position. So here again in my other illustration. So from this location, we can ask the torus, tell us what XYZ position that is, and also tell us what the normal is at this point. And this node is called sample property. So here we have it. Sample property expects a geometry, that's the torus, expects a location. And then it asks me, what do you want? Which type of thing do you want? And here I have already point position. You remember the very first example I showed you with the watch point where you had the list, what things are in the geometry. That's the name. Point position is the name. What else do we have? Point normal we have, right? So the programmer left the type unset. So we have to type set the type ourselves just to make sure that people look into this node here and really are sure that they want the point position. So here's my point position. And I can rename this node, say, this is the position, okay? I can also copy and paste this node and say, now I also want to have the point normal. Okay, so and here I'll rename this one here to normal, just to make sure that we know what we have here. We don't need this location scope anymore. I can throw that away and delete this port here, also delete the BIF object that showed me all of these arrows. I don't need that anymore. What I need now is this point position from outside, because we wanted to calculate, maybe I'll bring in my PowerPoint here again. So we wanted to calculate this vector here, the green one. And you get the green one when you do a subtract this one minus this one. So the tip of the arrow minus the start of the arrow, that gives me this arrow. And when we have that, we can compare to the point normal. So that is a subtraction. The point with the position on the torus is the first value. And you see me, I'm pulling the wire out of this connection already. And then I say, I want to make a subtraction. Here's the node already. That's the first value. Here's the second value. And what comes out of it is the vector. It's actually an array of vectors. Also here we have an array of normals. And you know, the sorting is correct. Both of them have the correct sorting. So every element of this one here belongs to the according element of this one here. And now we do the comparison with the dot product. And that is something you simply have to remember. Dot product gives you the cosine of the angle between the two values. And I hear my camera turn off. So we have the angle of the two values here. Now the cosine of this angle, and we said, okay, if it is greater, and we have a comparison node, greater, like so. If it is greater than 0, then a yes comes out. So for all of the points where this is greater than 0, we have a yes coming out. Oh, and what do we do with this yes now? We can't visualize it. Better ask, what do we want to do? Let's say I want to highlight all of the points that are inside the torus. So how do I highlight points? There is a set point shape. Set point shape node. This set point shape node is actually also a scope node. It visualizes points, which is cool. So it expects points. Actually, it expects a point object. We can create a point object. Let's do it. Let's construct a point object. Let's construct points. Just so, here's your points object. And this construct points expects point positions. And then ultimately will output red dots for us. So I move this a little bit away. Maybe I'll make a little bit more space here so you have a better overview. We still have this gap here. We need the point positions of all of the points that have a 1 here. And there is a trick, you know, I was very confused how to do that. There is a trick, in fact, there you can use the find all in array. This node here, find all of a certain value in this array. I won't find all the ones in this array that are fed in here, and I get out indices. Indices is very cool because it lets me filter another array, exactly this one here, the point positions on the sphere. I can create get from array. And this get from array, you see, it expects indices. So I can say all of the ones from my Boolean array, filter this one here, and out comes an array of values with my red dots. And here are my dots. So in the point shape node, I make them smaller, 0.05 maybe. I make them, damn it, and I don't have a color here. So the color needs to be set also. That's easier with a point scope. So let's swap it out for a point scope node. Where's my point scope? So point scope delivers all of that automatically. So I'd rather have it. So here's my point scope. Come on, it doesn't like that output. So when that happens and this output turns red, just make a new one here, and then it accepts that and delete the old stuff. So here we have a point scope. We can make the points bright red. 100. And then we have, you know, this, this size for the points here. Okay, so circles is maybe not the right one. I want discs. So here I have my red points, and you see when I move when I move the sphere in and out of the torus, you see that the points, you know, appear and disappear. I make them larger. So you see that the red points disappear when I move it out. So this is a good indication there's an intersection. And I should actually, let me try, I should have a beautiful example here of that thing. Damn it. Yeah, I just threw it away. So I have a beautiful example here. So the task is to find out, will this dancer intersect with these cylinders that we have here? I placed him so that, you know, he avoids getting in contact with them, but he has so many motions like this one here, large arc motions. It's really hard to tell, is he intersecting with these cylinders? And what I just did helps me to do exactly that. So what I would do here is to pull in the dancer and then to pull in all of these cylinders. And here's a problem. So maybe when we compare these two nodes, you see the problem. This is a single node, a single mesh. And this one here, the hat shape, is an array. And for my intersection check, arrays are not allowed. So what we need to do here with this array is to merge the geometries together. Merge geometry will take an array of geometries, all of these cylinders here, and merge them into one. So now we can deal with just one object. Now, where is the graph that I just created? I have saved the same thing here in this mesh intersection scope node. Now this is only one node. It has become only one node where I plug in the static mesh and the highlight mesh where the points are supposed to appear. I set a point size here, and then I output these points to my output. Before we look at this one node here, let me show you that it really works. Here you see already, you know, in white, we see that intersection, these red dots that are here. So only when there is an intersection, I see a lot of red dots. And then I have to take this, this cylinder here and move it away. Let me do that so that the points disappear, right? So now we have removed that intersection. So that is the workflow. Why do I have now one node instead of all of these nodes that I had before? Now, this is what we call a compound. You can tell it from this icon here. And when I double click on this compound, you see a new graph. And when you look closely, you see that it's the same thing. So we have a get point position from one of the objects. We have a get closest locations, sample position, sample normal, and subtract the position, one position from the other one, compare the two vectors with a dot product. Here's the greater node, here's the find all in array, get from array, construct points, etc. So all of that, and here's a breadcrumb path, all of that is packed into this node. You do that by doing a Control G. Actually, for grouping means I group these things together. That means you know, I want to pack it. Not only that, I also want to protect it. So when I double click on it, you see that here is a text not editable. This is reference. This is now living on my hard drive. And I just, you know, have a temporary, you know, I'm borrowing this from my hard drive. I can also load it in, import it, open it and modify it, but I could also take this text file and send it to a friend and he can use that as well, or post it in a forum, for example. Right? So let's have a look at some last examples here. We won't have much time to really go through how it is made, but I don't think it's going to be necessary. You understand the basic principles here. So this is an example for instancing. You see, what you see here is a whole mountain range, and we have 10,000s of little trees placed on the surface. Okay, these little trees are just very simple polygons so that I can still move my viewport interactively, but we can easily swap them out for real trees, for real trees with 10,000s of needles or leaves, and render an image with that. So how's that done? We have placed a face, or a node down here, which is a polyplanar object. From this polyplanar object, we simply shoot rays. Let me unhide the rays here. We shoot millions of rays onto that surface. So we are shooting the rays along the normal, and the node is called raycast locations, get raycast locations. So it shoots a ray in a certain direction from a certain point, and that then says, give me the location on that other geometry wherever that ray hits. I'm going to hide the rays again. Then in this whole thing, there is a minimum and maximum, so that I can say, okay, there has to be a minimum distance to my projection plane to cast really a point onto this geometry, so I can move my forest up and down. You could have different vegetation areas on your forest. That is one thing, and there's a very cool one here. So this plane here also has a so-called texture deformer on it, and this texture deformer is currently set to 0. Actually, I have to use the attribute editor. So this texture deformer is set to 0. So strength is set to 0. And when I move the strength up, and I think I have to move it quite a bit above 2 or so. You see what happens with the forest here? So we get some weird patterns in the forest, because what the texture deformer does, it bulges the surface. So it creates bulges on the surface. And when you have a bulge, the rays go a little bit outwards. And that's how we get these patterns here, these strings, looks very much like these visualizations of strings in space, of gravity strings in space. So that's how you create these weird patterns on the surface. So that is something that's really interesting. You can barely see this deformation here on that object. So that would be one thing. We could also go into the Bifrost graph here, maybe close the channel box, into the Bifrost graph, and swap out this projection geometry, which is the plane shape here, with a sphere shape. So I'm using a sphere to project the trees onto the mountain. So now when I move this sphere around, you see that, oh yeah, I'm, depending on the distance to the surface, it cuts them off. I can, manage the cutoff distance and the min distance over here. But that way I could say, okay, we only have trees on the side of the sun of the mountain, because behind the mountain, it's always so cold that no trees would grow from there, right? So these are examples of how you can play around with Bifrost endlessly. You can really, and trust me, I'm doing this for some weeks now, you can play forever. And it's a lot of fun to, find out new things you can do. You have to do a little bit math. Yes, I'm sorry, that is so. Vector calculation is not as bad as it was in school, because it gives you, Bifrost gives you capabilities of manage vectors, comparing vectors with a dot product. It would be quite difficult if you had to calculate that all on your own. So we have a ready-made functions for that, for the dot product, for sine, cosine, all these functions. So most of the things are prepared, and you only have to imagine, what else could I do with Bifrost, and how else can I go on finding weird things? Such a graph here, you can see it here in the scene. That is kind of a special function. you feed something in and you get something else out. So in this example, we feed in a geometry and it spits out instances of the trees. We can assign shaders to these instances and render them and everything, but think of it as, you know, a production node for geometry, or a modification node for geometry, a modification node for values. For example, you feed it some animation values and you get something different out, something with a special function. For rigging would be super interesting to use that to give your rig a special behavior depending on the inputs. Things that are really difficult to build currently in Maya. So with that, I'm going to turn off my screen sharing. I don't know if there are any questions. Do I see that here in the chat? No, I don't see any questions in the chat. So far, yeah, I can say that I started with Bifrost from being very naive. So I had no idea about the data types and the kinds of things that you can do with it. At the beginning, I thought it would be a dynamics project. You know, it's all dynamics and fire and explosions. That's the stuff that you can do. But that is also only a subset. You know, dynamics is cool and very nice to look at, but all of these extra functions, you know, calculations with points and values is something that is super cool, also because of the speed. So Bifrost, when it reads in stuff and calculates something, is awesome in terms of speed of the whole thing. So, and with that, I thank you very much. That was my presentation. I hope you had fun. Please visit me on my YouTube channel. Let me see if I can open the first PowerPoint again. So here, if you Google for my name, Roland Reyer, and Google Roland Reyer YouTube, then you will find my YouTube channel with lots of interesting videos about Bifrost, about rigging, dynamics, modeling, new features in Maya, and all of that stuff. So that would be an interesting thing to visit. And if you have a question, please send me a mail. roland.reyer@autodesk.com is my email address. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much too from our studio. Roland, I got a few questions, but it looks Bifrost is really massive tool for editing and also compositing in Maya. It's wonderful to make it because it's a very huge tool, and I think all users must find their way how to orient it inside. It looks very powerful. Do you have any tips or tricks when they can learn these things, or manuals or something like this?
There are already a bunch of videos out there. Some of them are complicated. So for example, the lead project manager for Bifrost has made a video, a 2-hour video, or actually 2 one-hour videos about Bifrost and how to make a very complex, to be honest, a super complex effect with Bifrost, which is okay for people who do that already, or, you know, programmers or so, but for artists it's a little bit too complex. But for artists there are already demo tutorial videos out there, how to start with it, how to begin to do your first you know, basic graphs, to learn to understand how data flows in the graph, and how you handle it, how you move it from one point over to another one, and very important, how you check whether what you have done is right, or what's the reason why it's not working. Finding information is the most important thing, and that is something very much like when you learn a programming language. It's difficult at the beginning, it's going to get better. So don't give up. That's my advice for all the artists who start with it. It's going to be complicated, it hurts a little bit, but it's very rewarding once you learned it, once you know how to deal with it.
Okay, thank you. This Bifrost is not compatible with the older version, I think.
It goes back to version 2018, as far as I know. So you can load the plugin for 2018, 2019, and 2020. So we have a backwards compatibility, which is surprising, but that is also the goal of the Bifrost team to say this Bifrost is a plugin, and you will have in the future the same plugin for other products as well. So it's not going to be limited to Maya. There will be versions for other products. I can't promise when we have it, but you know, I know for sure that they are working on it, and that's why there's a little bit of separation between Maya and Bifrost. We always have to fight with handing data over and back into Maya because of this nature of it being a plugin. But that's also the reason why it's backwards compatible. That's why there's a version for older Mayas as well. You can load these versions from the Autodesk websites or area.autodesk.com. That's our community website. Just Google helps you, say Maya Bifrost download, and you will point it at the download website.
I'm a 3D Studio Max user, and sorry, but do you think this Bifrost can be sometime? I know you are Autodesk guy, so maybe you have a little information more than I expect. And Alex Horst is a next one who can maybe describe what we can wait in the future for 3D Studio Max. Bifrost can be in the future compatible with 3D Studio Max?
It can be in the future, and I'm personally pretty sure, but nobody should do any purchase decisions just because I'm saying that. I have no time plans, how long it would take until we even see a first beta, but you know, it would be a logical path. It doesn't make any sense to keep it out of Maya and being a plugin and then not make it compatible to other products. Imagine it would be so super cool if you had the same graphs for Maya and 3ds Max and maybe even other products. That would be super, super cool.
Okay, that sounds very good, and that's a good future. Thank you very much, Roland. It was very interesting to see all this workflow and possibilities of the Bifrost. Have a nice day, and I hope so we will see you on some next Get Splash with another great topic, I hope so. And right now we have a little bit of advertising, and the next one is Alex Horst with his 3D Studio Max introduction, and we will be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice
Bye.
day. are back with a little information. Actually, the lecture from Alex Horst is planned at 16:30, so we propose a half an hour break. So grab a coffee, have some snacks or something, and we'll be back here at 16:30 with Alex Horst. See you soon.
See you soon.